How can an orphan lacking money or connections create the world's most iconic watch brand? Although a substantial part of Rolex's past remains wrapped in mystery and secrecy, today we'll explore the remarkable rags-to-riches tale behind Rolex and address the question, why are Rolex watches truly so expensive? Our story begins with Hans Wilsdorf, the brand's innovative and enigmatic founder. Born in Germany in 1881 to Anna and Jonah Wilsdorf, Hans spent his early years surrounded by love, laughter, and happiness. Tragically, this came to a sudden end when, at the age of 12, both of his parents died unexpectedly just a few months apart. In an instant, Hans went from having two caring parents to becoming an orphan, forced to live with his uncles, who sent him off to boarding school. Initially, he fell into deep sadness, but he eventually decided to immerse himself in his studies as a way to cope. He seemed to have a particular enthusiasm for learning new languages, which would later pave the way for his move abroad after finishing school. After graduating, Hans took a job in Switzerland at Kuhn & Korten, a large exporter dealing with a wide range of pocket watches. Proficient in German, English, and French, Hans worked as a clerk and correspondent. This firm also made some of its own watches, giving Hans the perfect chance to gain insights into watch construction and thoroughly examine the watchmaking industry. Although much of his day-to-day work was repetitive, such as cataloging hundreds of watches, it was during this period that Hans developed a profound respect for craftsmanship and became fixated on the goal of creating flawless watches. By 1903, Hans relocated to London and joined another firm where his duties expanded to include securing new sales and clients. This experience helped him understand the qualities that set one watch brand apart from another, as well as how essential marketing is to a brand's success. Even though he enjoyed these various roles, Hans's ambitions were already soaring beyond what employment could offer. In 1905, at the youthful age of 24, Hans decided to establish his own watchmaking business. He contributed the modest savings he had gathered, while the majority of the funding came from his brother-in-law Alfred Davis, who would join him as co-founder. Together, they formed the Wilsdorf and Davis Company and started importing watches from Switzerland to sell in the UK. Back then, wristwatches were far from being as popular as they are today, and were mostly seen as feminine jewelry. In fact, Hans's friends tried to discourage him, insisting that such a small and delicate mechanism would be flimsy and inaccurate. Pocket watches were the dominant preference. Still, Hans believed wristwatches were more convenient and elegant. He is quoted as saying, "My personal opinion is that pocket watches will almost completely disappear and that wristwatches will definitively replace them." Hans felt that what was needed was simply higher quality. Paying no attention to his critics, Hans invested every penny of the company's funds into placing one of the largest wristwatch orders of the era. He was wagering everything on wristwatches becoming the future of timepieces. Everyone thought he was mad, and even his business partner doubted the decision. Yet it turned out to be correct. Hans reportedly met numerous master watchmakers, gleaning at least one new insight from each. He then relied on a prior connection from his time in Switzerland to import Swiss-made mechanisms, allowing them to start producing top-quality wristwatches. However, Hans recognized that quality alone wouldn't suffice. Building strong brand recognition would be crucial, and that journey began with a memorable name. The origin of Rolex is somewhat peculiar. According to Hans, he first attempted countless random letter combinations, but nothing felt suitable. Then, as he commuted one morning, he claimed a genie whispered Rolex in his ear. Regardless of how the name truly emerged, it was perfect, short, memorable, and easy to pronounce in any language. More importantly, Rolex carried a sense of style and authority. Hans began printing it on every watch dial, helping strengthen brand recognition. A few years later, the entire company name became Rolex Watchcomb Limited. It wasn't long before their wristwatches sold briskly. In 1910, Rolex became the first wristwatch to earn the Swiss Certificate of Precision. 4 years later, in 1914, the British Kew Observatory awarded a Rolex watch a Class A rating, an honor never before given to such a timepiece. Rolex began to be associated with quality, drawing even more buyers. But then, in 1914, World War I erupted. By this time, Rolex's London headquarters employed over 60 staff and served as the export hub for all its global markets. During the war, however, Germany became Britain's enemy, and since Hans was German with a German name and accent, tensions rose. Moreover, the British government introduced a 33% wartime import duty on luxury goods. To avoid conflict and reap tax advantages, Hans decided to move Rolex's headquarters from England to Switzerland, a neutral country during the war. While numerous watch companies collapsed during World War I, Rolex thrived because its wristwatches, more reliable and convenient than pocket watches, were favored by the military. Undoubtedly, Rolex's phenomenal growth can be credited to Hans's marketing savvy. As early as the 1920s, he placed Rolex watches on explorers, athletes, racers, aviators, and a host of other accomplished individuals, shaping a perception that high achievers chose Rolex. He also ran hundreds of strategically placed ads on radio and in newspapers, capitalizing on product placement decades before his rivals caught on. In 1926, Rolex released the world's first commercially available, fully waterproof watch, the Oyster. Hans knew exactly how to promote it. He heard about a woman planning to swim across the English Channel and persuaded her to wear the new waterproof Rolex. After more than 10 strenuous hours in frigid waters, she emerged with the Oyster intact, generating headlines that highlighted Rolex's innovation. Hans then instructed dealers to showcase the waterproof Oyster in their windows inside fish tanks, complete with live fish swimming around it. Inevitably, passers-by couldn't help but notice. Another groundbreaking milestone occurred just 5 years later, when Rolex's engineers developed the perpetual rotor, enabling a watch to wind itself automatically, something once deemed impossible. Hans also made certain that world-famous individuals, especially those taking on daring feats, wore Rolex watches. For instance, the team that made the first flight to Everest carried a Rolex Oyster, and Malcolm Campbell wore a Rolex when setting a land speed record in Utah in 1935. This fusion of exceptional marketing and constant innovation allowed Rolex to expand quickly and steadily grow in popularity. On the company's 40th anniversary in 1945, Rolex introduced yet another new model, the Datejust, the first automatic watch with a date window on its face. Shortly before this launch ceremony, Hans experienced another tragedy, the loss of his beloved wife, Florence, who died from illness. She had supported him through thick and thin, making this a profoundly painful time. Hans had been orphaned at 12 and was now widowed at 63, with no children. A master of watches but not of time, Hans began contemplating his own mortality. Over the following years, he sought a way to ensure that the empire he'd built from nothing would remain safeguarded. In 1946, he founded the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, transferring his entire 100% ownership stake in Rolex to this organization. To this day, the foundation retains full ownership and control of the brand. Because it's a foundation rather than a corporation, Rolex pays no corporate taxes. Instead, a substantial portion of its profits funds charitable endeavors, including educational grants and training for watchmakers. Although it's rumored not all profits go to charitable causes, since Rolex is owned by a trust, it has no shareholders and faces no obligation to disclose its financial details. This structure grants Rolex a high level of secrecy. Hence, despite being the world's most recognized watch brand, little is known about its internal workings, how it's managed, who manages it, how much it earns, or how it allocates those earnings. Some might say the foundation is merely a strategic mechanism to preserve Rolex's wealth and authority. Employees are bound by strict non-disclosure agreements, and reportedly no photography is allowed inside Rolex's facilities. Operating from the shadows, Rolex makes it nearly impossible to scrutinize its actions because so little is known. When Hans passed away in 1960, the brand's new guardians continued to guide the company toward even greater success. Still, a substantial challenge emerged in the 1970s, the quartz revolution. Battery-operated watches that were more accurate, cheaper, and easier to mass-produce flooded the market, driving many mechanical watchmakers into bankruptcy. Between 1970 and 1988, the Swiss watch industry's workforce plummeted from 90,000 to 28,000 employees. Nevertheless, Rolex remained unscathed. Ultimately, given the tremendous hardships Hans overcame from an early age, it's astonishing what he achieved. The Rolex narrative undoubtedly contains valuable business lessons for all of us. Thank you for watching until the very end. You are a legend, and I'll see you in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe.